My name is Kara Myers, and I'm 35 years old. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness in the parking lot of my office building was thinking how strange it was that my vision had gone blurry in both eyes at exactly the same moment. I had been walking to my car after a 12-hour shift, my laptop bag digging into my shoulder, my coffee long gone cold in my hand. Then the ground came up fast, and everything went dark. I woke up in the ICU 3 days later with a breathing tube being pulled from my throat and a nurse named Sandra telling me I had suffered a severe cardiac event, a spontaneous coronary artery dissection, something that strikes otherwise healthy women in their 30s without warning, without explanation, and without mercy. My heart had essentially torn itself from the inside. I had flatlined twice in the ambulance. A stranger in the parking lot had performed CPR on me for 7 minutes until the paramedics arrived. A complete stranger had kept me alive. I held on to that fact like a lifeline in those first foggy hours because what came after made it the most painful irony of my life. The hospital had my parents listed as my emergency contacts. I had never updated that information from when I first filled out my intake forms years ago, back when I still believed they were the kind of people who showed up. The ICU nursing staff called my mother's number 9 times over the course of 72 hours. 9 times. They left voicemails explaining that their daughter was in critical condition. They called my father's number when my mother didn't answer. They left messages there too. They tried both numbers together, alternating, hoping someone would pick up. Nobody did. What I didn't know while I was lying in that bed with monitors beeping around me and 4 lines running into both arms was that my younger sister, Vivian, had just closed on a new house across town. And my parents had decided, fully consciously, fully deliberately, that helping her move furniture and hang curtains and organize her kitchen was more important than answering a single one of those calls. My mother told me this herself later, in the way she always delivered uncomfortable truths, which was casually, almost defensively, as though the real problem was my reaction rather than what she had done. She said she had seen the hospital's number come up but assumed if it were truly serious, someone would handle it. She said Vivian had been so stressed about the move. She said I had always been the strong one. I had always been the strong one. That phrase followed me through every hour of those first days of recovery. I lay in that hospital bed running it through my mind while my heart monitor tracked each fragile beat. I had put myself through college on scholarships and part-time work while Vivian got her tuition paid. I had never asked my parents for money, not once, because I learned early that their resources flowed in one direction and I was not on the receiving end of it. I had shown up to every family event, every birthday, every holiday, even when I was exhausted, even when I felt invisible. I had sent cards and called on weekends and never once made them feel guilty for the disparity between how they treated me and how they treated my sister, because I had convinced myself that if I just kept being steady and reliable and low maintenance, eventually they would see me. Eventually the scales would even out. Instead, while I was dying, they were unwrapping Vivian's kitchen boxes. My coworker Brent was the one who finally came. Not because the hospital reached him, they didn't have his number, but because I had missed 2 days of work without calling in, and Brent knew that was not something I would ever do. He showed up at my apartment, got no answer, and started calling hospitals until he found me. He sat beside my bed for 4 hours that first afternoon and didn't ask a single question that I wasn't ready to answer. He just stayed. I cried exactly once that day, not from the physical pain, which was considerable, but because of the simple, overwhelming shock of being found by someone who had gone looking. On the 4th day, my parents finally called back. My mother's voice was breezy in a way that made my chest tighten, which my cardiologist had specifically told me to avoid. She said they had just seen all the missed calls and that she hoped everything was okay and that they'd had such a hectic few days with the move. My father got on the line briefly and said he was glad I was resting up. Resting up. As though I had taken a personal day. I didn't say much. I told them I was stable. I told them I'd be in touch. And when I hung up the phone, I lay very still in that hospital bed and made a decision that I had been quietly building toward my entire adult life. I called my lawyer. His name was Gordon Webb, and I told him I needed him to come to the ICU as soon as he possibly could. Because what my parents were about to learn, when they eventually showed up, was exactly what their neglect had cost them. Gordon arrived the next morning with his briefcase and his reading glasses and the particular calm expression he always wore when he already understood the full weight of a situation before you finished explaining it. I had been his client for 11 years. He had helped me set up my will, my medical directives, my power of attorney, all the paperwork that responsible adults accumulate quietly over time and hope they never actually need. He pulled a chair close to my bed, set his notepad on his knee, and listened without interrupting while I told him everything. The 9 calls, the voicemails, the moving boxes, my mother's breezy tone on the phone, my father saying I was resting up. All of it. When I finished, Gordon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I told him exactly what I wanted to do. My parents were listed as the sole beneficiaries of my estate. Everything, my apartment, my investments, my retirement accounts, a life insurance policy I had been paying into for 14 years, all of it was designated to go to them when I died. I had set it up that way years ago, before I fully understood the architecture of our family dynamic, back when I still believed that blood carried some kind of automatic obligation. I had never updated those documents because updating them felt like an admission of something I wasn't ready to admit. But lying in an ICU bed where I had been unreachable and alone for 3 days had a way of clarifying things that years of ordinary life had kept comfortably blurry. Gordon spent 2 hours with me that morning. We went through every document methodically. By the time he left, my estate had a new primary beneficiary, a cardiac health foundation that funded research into the exact condition that had nearly killed me. Spontaneous coronary artery dissection received almost no research funding relative to how frequently it struck young women. I had learned that from my cardiologist during one of our long conversations in those quiet hospital hours. It seemed right. The money that had been earmarked for people who didn't answer my calls would now go toward making sure other women in hospital beds had a better chance of survival than I did. I also made one additional change. I removed my parents entirely from my medical power of attorney and replaced them with Brent, who accepted with the kind of quiet seriousness that told me he understood what I was actually asking him. I updated my emergency contact information with the hospital before I was even discharged. That felt important. I didn't want there to be any ambiguity the next time. My parents came on a Saturday 11 days after I had been admitted. My mother brought flowers, yellow tulips in a plastic sleeve from a grocery store, and my father stood slightly behind her the way he always did when he sensed the atmosphere was uncertain. Vivian did not come. I hadn't expected her to. My mother set the tulips on the windowsill without asking if I wanted them there, and then turned to look at me with an expression that was clearly intended to communicate concern but landed several degrees short of it. She said I looked thin. She said the room was cold. She asked if the doctors were good ones. My father asked how much longer I'd be kept. I let them talk for a while. I didn't rush it. I had spent 11 days in that bed with nothing but time and the slow steadying work of deciding who I wanted to be on the other side of this, and one of the decisions I had made was that I was not going to be angry in the way they probably expected. I was not going to cry or raise my voice or demand an explanation for the 9 unanswered calls, because I had already understood the explanation. The explanation was simply who they were. It had always been who they were. I had just needed a cardiac event to stop pretending otherwise. When there was a pause in the conversation, I told them calmly that I had made some changes to my estate documents while I was in the hospital. I told them they were no longer listed as beneficiaries. I told them the money would be going to medical research instead. My mother's face went through several expressions very quickly. My father straightened slightly and started to say something about how I had clearly been through a lot and wasn't thinking clearly, and I told him, with complete evenness, that I had never thought more clearly in my life. They left 20 minutes later. My mother took the tulips with her, which I thought was a perfect ending to the visit. I was discharged 4 days after that. Brent picked me up and drove me home and helped me carry my bag upstairs and didn't make a single comment about any of it except to ask if I was hungry, because he had stopped at the deli on the way. I told him I was starving. We sat at my kitchen table and ate sandwiches and talked about completely ordinary things, and it was the best afternoon I had experienced in longer than I could honestly remember. I don't know what my parents told Vivian. I don't know if they felt anything close to what I needed them to feel. What I know is that I stopped waiting for them to become different people, and that single shift, quiet as it was, felt more like survival than anything the doctors had done for my heart. Some people show you exactly who they are when it costs them nothing to show up. Pay attention the first time. And if you're watching this and you've ever felt like the strong one in a family that only calls when they need something, you are not alone and you are not invisible here.